Kethvar stood before the massive viewing screen in the council chambers, watching as the newest member species approached the station. The human ships looked strange compared to the sleek vessels of other civilizations, where most species built their ships with smooth curves and elegant lines. Human ships looked like they were made for war. Sharp angles, thick armor, and weapons that seemed too big for the hulls that carried them. "They call themselves humans," said Council Speaker Thane, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "From a planet they named Earth. Third planet from a yellow star in the Outer Rim territories." Kethvar nodded, his 4 eyes studying the datapad in his hands. As a member of the Simithon Collective, he had served as military advisor for over 200 years. He had seen many species join the Galactic Council. Most came seeking protection, trade, or knowledge. The humans were different. They came because 3 separate alien forces had tried to invade their world, and the humans had destroyed them all. "This seems impossible," Kethvar said, reading the reports again. "They defeated the Krillian Empire without faster-than-light travel. They destroyed a hegemony invasion fleet using primitive nuclear weapons. How does a species fight off interstellar forces while still trapped on one planet?" "That is what you will find out," Speaker Thane replied. "The Council has decided to assign you as military liaison to study their methods. We need to understand how they fight." Kethvar looked at the human ships again. Each one bore scars from battle. Repair patches covered hull breaches. Weapon ports showed signs of heavy use. These were not parade ships. These were tools of war that had been used many times. The council chamber, filled with representatives from dozens of worlds. Each species had its own way of war, but they all followed the same basic rules. Battles were fought until one side had clear advantage. The losing side would surrender to avoid unnecessary deaths. Prisoners were treated well. Civilian targets were forbidden. War was terrible, but it was also civilized. "Ambassador Kethvar," came a new voice. Kethvar turned to see a human approaching. The being was shorter than most galactic species, covered in smooth skin that looked far too fragile for a warrior race. "I am Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Force." Kethvar studied the human carefully. She walked with confidence, but not arrogance. Her clothing was practical, designed for function rather than appearance. Most striking were her eyes. They held an intensity that Kethvar had never seen in other species. It was not anger or hatred. It was something else. Something that made Kethvar slightly uncomfortable. "Captain Chen," Kethvar replied with formal politeness, "I have been assigned to observe your military methods. The Council hopes to learn from your experiences. We're happy to share what we know," Captain Chen said. "Though I should warn you, our way of fighting might seem strange to other species." "How so?" "We don't give up," she said simply. "Ever." Kethvar thought about this. Every species said they were brave. Every military claimed they would fight hard. But there was something in the way the humans said these words that suggested she meant them differently than others did. "Tell me about your recent conflicts," Kethvar said as they walked through the station corridors. Other species moved aside when they saw the human approaching. Word had spread quickly about Earth's military record. "The Krillians came first," Captain Chen explained. "They sent scouts, then invasion forces. They had better technology, more ships, superior weapons. They should have won easily, but they did not. No. They made a mistake. They attacked our cities first, thinking we would surrender to protect civilians. Instead, it made us angry. Really angry. We fought back with everything we had. When they destroyed our space stations, we used ground-based weapons. When they knocked out our power grids, we fought with whatever we could find. When they landed troops, we fought them in the streets." "And you won?" Captain Chen smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "We didn't just win. We hunted down every single Krillian ship and destroyed it. Then we took their technology and used it to build better weapons." Kethvar felt a chill run through his body. The way she spoke about hunting down enemy forces was disturbing. Most species were satisfied with victory. They did not pursue defeated enemies. It was considered unnecessary cruelty. What about the second invasion? The hegemony heard about what happened to the Krillians. They thought they could do better. They sent a much larger force and demanded immediate surrender. They promised to spare our cities if we gave up without fighting. A reasonable offer for a defeated species. We're not a defeated species, Captain Chen said, her voice growing cold. We told them no. They attacked anyway. We had captured Krillian ships by then, so the fight was more even. But it was still hard. They outnumbered us 5-1. How did you survive? We cheated, she said with that strange smile again. When they destroyed our orbital defenses, we rammed damaged ships into their fleet. When they targeted our military bases, we moved weapons into civilian areas and fought from there. When they thought they had won, we hit them with nuclear weapons launched from submarines hidden in our oceans. Kethvar stopped walking. You used nuclear weapons in space combat? We used everything we had. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, cyber attacks, psychological warfare. We turned merchant ships into bombs. We pretended to surrender, then activated self-destruct charges when their forces came aboard. We fought in ways they never expected. That sounds... Kethvar searched for the right word. Dishonorable. Honor doesn't matter when your species faces extinction, Captain Chen replied. The only thing that matters is winning. They reached the observation deck where human ships were docked. Through the transparent walls, Kethvar could see human crew members working on repairs. They moved with purpose and efficiency, but there was something else in their behavior. They watched each other's backs. They helped wounded comrades without being asked. They acted like a family instead of just a military unit. Your third conflict was with the Void Hunters, correct? Kethvar asked. Captain Chen's expression darkened. The Void Hunters don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They consume entire planets and everyone on them. When they came to Earth, we knew there would be no mercy. How did you defeat beings that had destroyed hundreds of worlds? We learned something about them. They're very efficient. They calculate odds and choose the most effective attacks. They expect their enemies to do the same thing. They expect rational behavior. And you were not rational? We were human, Captain Chen said. We did things that made no sense. We sacrificed ships to save single soldiers. We fought to the death to protect people we had never met. We refused to retreat even when the situation was hopeless. The Void Hunters couldn't understand us. They're used to fighting logical enemies. We don't think like that. As they talked, Kethvar began to realize something disturbing. The humans had not won their conflicts through superior technology or brilliant strategy. They had won through sheer refusal to accept defeat. They fought in ways that other species considered impossible or insane. The Council wants me to observe your methods, Kethvar said. There may be conflict with the hegemony again soon. They are expanding into neutral territory. We'll be ready, Captain Chen said. We're always ready. Looking at the human ships and their crews, Kethvar believed her. But he was beginning to understand why other species feared them. It was not their weapons or their ships. It was something much more frightening. These humans fought like the universe itself was trying to kill them, and they refused to let it win. The joint strategy meeting took place in the largest briefing room on the Council station. Representatives from 7 different species sat around a holographic display showing the current military situation. The hegemony had begun expanding again, taking control of 3 star systems in neutral space. Their forces outnumbered the Council fleet by almost 3-1. Kethvar took his place among the other military advisors, his datapad ready to record observations about human tactics. Around the table sat the finest military minds in the galaxy. Each species had sent their best strategists and commanders. The Scymathans were known for their careful planning. The Altarians excelled at defensive warfare. The Zentari were masters of space combat logistics. And then there were the humans. Captain Chen sat with 2 other human officers at the far end of the table. They looked small compared to the other species, almost fragile. But Kethvar noticed something in their posture that set them apart. While other commanders sat back in their chairs, Studying the display with cautious expressions, the humans leaned forward. They looked eager, almost excited. "The situation is clear," announced General Vex of the Altarian Defense Force. His voice carried the authority of someone who had fought in dozens of campaigns. "Enemy forces control the jump points in all 3 systems. They have superior numbers and defensive positions. Any attack would result in massive casualties." The holographic display rotated, showing the hegemony positions in red and council forces in blue. The red markers vastly outnumbered the blue ones. Standard military doctrine was simple in such situations. Avoid direct confrontation, establish defensive positions, and wait for better circumstances. "Recommended course of action?" asked Admiral Thex of the Zentari fleet. "Strategic withdrawal," replied General Vex without hesitation. "We pull back to defensible positions and negotiate for neutral zone restoration. Accept current losses to prevent greater ones." Heads nodded around the table. This was logical, practical, and would save lives on both sides. Kethvar made notes on his pad, expecting the humans to agree with this sensible approach. "No," said Captain Chen. Every head in the room turned toward her. The simple word carried absolute certainty. "I'm sorry?" General Vex asked, clearly confused. "We said no," Captain Chen repeated. "We're not retreating. We're going to attack." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Kethvar could see confusion and concern on alien faces around the table. This was not how galactic warfare worked. When outnumbered 3-1, rational beings withdrew to fight another day. "Captain Chen," Admiral Thex said carefully, "perhaps you misunderstood the tactical situation. The enemy has clear numerical superiority. An attack would be suicide." "Would it?" asked Major Williams, one of the other human officers. He stood and moved to the holographic display, pointing at the red markers. "They have more ships." "Yes. But look at their positioning. They're spread across 3 systems, thinking we'll try to negotiate or retreat, because that is the logical response." General Vex replied with growing frustration. "For you, maybe," Major Williams said. "But we don't think like that." Kethvar watched as the human began manipulating the display, showing attack vectors that made no tactical sense. The proposed routes led straight into the heaviest enemy concentrations. "This is madness," muttered Commander Zeal of the Rigelian Navy. "You would lose half your fleet in the first engagement." "Probably," agreed Captain Chen calmly. "Maybe more." "Then why would you do it?" "Because losing half our fleet to win is better than losing all of it when they decide to keep expanding." The room erupted in protests and objections. Species after species explained why the human plan violated basic military principles. Kethvar listened to terms he had learned in military academy. Acceptable loss ratios, strategic value calculations, cost-benefit analysis. The humans listened politely, then Captain Chen stood up. "You're all thinking about this wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the arguments. "You're treating this like a game with rules. Calculate odds, minimize losses, preserve resources for future conflicts. Because that is how civilized warfare is conducted," General Vex replied stiffly. "We're not civilized," Captain Chen said, with that unsettling smile Kethvar was beginning to recognize. "We're human." She moved to the display and began showing a different kind of battle plan. Instead of careful positioning and measured advances, she outlined rapid strikes designed to cause maximum confusion. Ships would attack in small groups, hit hard, then withdraw only to attack again from a different angle. "This is guerrilla warfare," observed Admiral Thex with disapproval. "Effective against superior forces, perhaps, but it lacks honor." "Honor doesn't win battles," replied Major Williams. "Fear does." Kethvar felt that chill again. The way the humans spoke about warfare was disturbing. They talked about causing fear, about accepting massive casualties, about fighting in ways that other species considered dishonorable or insane. "Let me understand this," General Vex said slowly. "You propose to attack a superior force, accept heavy losses, use unconventional tactics, and somehow achieve victory." "That's exactly what we propose," Captain Chen confirmed. "It's impossible. We've done it before." The human pulled up historical data from Earth's conflicts with alien invaders. Battle reports showed impossible odds overcome through tactics that defied conventional military wisdom. Ships rammed into enemy formations. Damaged vessels used as weapons. Wounded crews fighting past the point where other species would surrender. These reports cannot be accurate, Commander Zeal protested. No species fights like this. We do, said the third human officer, Colonel Torres. It's how we're built. Kethvar found himself asking, "What do you mean?" Colonel Torres looked at him with those intense human eyes. On Earth, we evolved as hunters, not ambush predators like most species. Persistence hunters. We would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, sometimes for days. We never gave up. But you are civilized now, Admiral Thex pointed out. Surely you have evolved past such primitive instincts. Have we? Captain Chen asked. We still chase things until we catch them. We still fight until we win. We still refuse to quit when things get hard. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. Other species had evolved past their hunter origins, becoming more rational and calculating. The humans had simply refined their hunting instincts into military doctrine. You're talking about a war of attrition, General Vex said with growing horror. You would sacrifice countless lives for a chance at victory. Not countless, Major Williams corrected. Just enough. Enough for what? Enough to win. Kethvar looked around the table at the shocked faces of galactic military leaders. These were beings who had fought wars for thousands of years. But they had never encountered anything like human logic. Or perhaps it was human illogic. There is something else, Captain Chen said, bringing up a new display. We volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. What do you mean? Asked Admiral Thex. The direct assault on their fortress world. We'll take that mission. Every commander in the room began protesting at once. The fortress world was the most heavily defended target in hegemony space. It would require a massive fleet and months of siege warfare to capture. Sending a smaller force would be suicide. Why would you volunteer for certain death? General Vex demanded. Because it's not certain death, Captain Chen replied. It's just really, really hard. The difference being? We specialize in really, really hard. Kethvar made rapid notes on his pad. The humans were not just willing to accept difficult odds. They seemed to prefer them. This violated everything he understood about rational behavior. What do you need from us? Asked Admiral Thex, resignation clear in his voice. Support roles, Major Williams said. Cover our retreat routes if things go wrong. Provide medical support for casualties. Extract survivors if we fail. When you fail, corrected General Vex. If, Captain Chen repeated firmly. We don't plan to fail. No one plans to fail, Commander Zeal pointed out. But rational beings prepare for the possibility. We prepare for victory, Colonel Torres said. Everything else is just details. As the meeting broke up into smaller planning sessions, Kethvar found himself studying the humans more closely. They moved and spoke like other species, but their thinking was fundamentally different. Where others saw impossible odds, they saw challenges to overcome. Where others calculated acceptable losses, they calculated ways to win. Most disturbing of all, they seemed genuinely confident about their chances. This was not bravado or false courage. These humans actually believed they could win a battle against impossible odds. Watching them work with the other commanders, Kethvar began to understand why 3 separate alien invasions had failed against Earth. It was not human technology or strategy that made them dangerous. It was their complete refusal to accept that some battles could not be won. As the humans left the briefing room, still discussing attack plans and casualty estimates, Kethvar realized something that made his blood run cold. These beings were not just confident about winning an impossible battle, they were looking forward to it. The command ship held position at the edge of the battle zone, far enough away to avoid direct combat, but close enough to monitor all communications. Kethvar stood at the main tactical display, watching as human forces approached the heavily defended hegemony positions. Around him, officers from various species tracked the battle with growing concern. Human fleet approaching optimal weapons range, reported Lieutenant Zara, a Zentari communications officer. Enemy forces are locking targeting systems. On the display, red and blue dots moved in the three-dimensional space around the fortress world. The red markers representing hegemony forces formed defensive shells around their positions, exactly as military doctrine suggested. The blue markers representing human ships moved in patterns that made no tactical sense. "Why are they not maintaining formation?" asked Commander Vel, the Regelian tactical advisor. "They're breaking apart before the battle even begins." Kethvar watched as human ships spread out in seemingly random directions. Some moved straight toward the heaviest defenses, others took curved paths that exposed them to crossfire. A few actually accelerated beyond normal combat speeds, racing toward enemy positions with reckless abandon. "Captain Chen, please confirm your approach vector," Admiral Thex called over the communications channel. "Your ships appear to be off course." "Negative, Admiral," came Captain Chen's voice, calm despite the chaos building around her. "We're exactly where we need to be." The first exchange of weapons fire lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy. Hegemony defense platforms opened fire with the coordinated precision expected of a superior force. Their targeting was perfect, their timing flawless. The humans fired back. What happened next violated every principle of space combat that Kethvar had learned in 2 centuries of military service. Instead of maintaining safe distances and engaging in careful exchanges of fire, the human ships charged straight into the enemy formations. "This is insane," muttered Commander Vel. "They're flying directly into the weapons grid." Kethvar watched in fascination and horror as human vessels took massive damage but continued their attacks. A human destroyer lost its main engines but kept firing. A cruiser had its hull breached in 3 places but accelerated toward an enemy battleship instead of withdrawing for repairs. "Human vessel Defiant is taking critical damage," Lieutenant Zara reported. "They're requesting immediate evacuation support." "Negative," came the response from the Defiant's captain. "We're not done yet." On the tactical display, Kethvar could see the Defiant was finished. Its weapon systems were offline, life support was failing, and the hull was coming apart. Any rational crew would abandon ship or surrender to preserve their lives. Instead, the Defiant changed course and aimed directly at a hegemony heavy cruiser. "What are they doing?" Commander Vel asked in disbelief. The answer became clear as the dying human ship collided with the enemy vessel at full speed. The explosion consumed both ships in a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded the observation sensors. "They rammed them," Kethvar said quietly. "They deliberately destroyed themselves to take out one enemy ship." Similar scenes played out across the battle zone. Human crews fought their ships past the point where other species would consider them destroyed. When weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When ships were crippled, they used them as shields to protect other vessels. "Human Squad Alpha 7 is cut off," reported Lieutenant Zara. "They're surrounded by 3 hegemony destroyers with no escape route." Kethvar watched the tactical display, expecting to see the isolated human ships request extraction or attempt to surrender. Standard military protocol was clear. When surrounded and outnumbered, preserve your forces by withdrawing or negotiating. The humans did something else. "Alpha 7 to all human forces," came a voice over the communications channel. "We're going to buy you some time. Make it count." Instead of trying to escape, the surrounded human ships turned toward the nearest enemy formation and attacked. They fought with desperate fury, drawing more hegemony vessels away from the main battle. Their weapons blazed continuously. Their movement became more aggressive, not less. "They're fighting harder," Kethvar observed with growing amazement. "Being surrounded made them more dangerous, not less." "It makes no sense," Commander Vel replied. "Desperate situations should lead to surrender or retreat, not increased aggression." But the humans kept fighting. Alpha 7 held their position for another 10 minutes, destroying 2 enemy destroyers and damaging a third before finally being overwhelmed. By that time, other human forces had broken through the defensive line the surrounded squad had helped weaken. "Incoming transmission from human medical frigate," Lieutenant Zara announced. "They're requesting permission to enter the battle zone." "Denied," Admiral Thex responded immediately. Medical vessels do not enter active combat areas. It violates interstellar warfare conventions. Tell that to the humans, Kethvar said, pointing at the display. A ship marked with medical symbols was accelerating toward the battle zone, heading directly for the area where human vessels were taking the heaviest casualties. As they watched, enemy fire began targeting the medical ship. Why are they shooting at a medical vessel? Commander Vel demanded. Because it's not just a medical vessel, Kethvar realized. Look at the scanner readings. The human medical frigate was heavily armored and carrying weapons in addition to its medical equipment. As it reached the battle zone, it began firing at enemy positions while simultaneously retrieving wounded crew members from damaged human ships. Combat medic ship, Lieutenant Zara reported with amazement. They're fighting and healing at the same time. Kethvar watched human medical personnel in armored suits launch from their ship and fly through crossfire to reach damaged vessels. They retrieved wounded crew members under enemy fire, carrying them back to the medical ship while dodging weapons fire that would have killed most species instantly. The humans are reinforcing, Commander Vel announced with confusion. More ships are arriving. New blue markers appeared at the edge of the tactical display. Instead of the careful reserve forces that other species maintained, these were clearly frontline combat vessels. They were not coming to extract human forces from a deteriorating situation. They were coming to join the fight. Why are they sending more ships? Kethvar asked. The battle is already balanced on the edge of disaster. Human vessel, tenacious to fleet command, came a new voice over communications. We're here to help finish this. The newly arrived human ships did not take defensive positions or coordinate careful attacks. They dove straight into the heaviest fighting, adding their firepower to battles that were already at the breaking point. What followed defied every military manual in the galaxy. Human ships fought in ways that seemed designed to maximize risk rather than minimize it. Damaged vessels returned to combat before repairs were complete. Crews that should have been evacuating instead took more dangerous assignments. Human engineering teams are doing something, Lieutenant Zara reported. They're modifying weapon systems during the battle. On the scanner displays, Kethvar could see human engineers working on damaged ships while those ships continued fighting. They were jury-rigging weapons from spare parts, rerouting power from non-essential systems, and somehow keeping their vessels in the fight long after they should have been disabled. Look at this, Commander Vel said, pointing at one section of the display. That human cruiser has lost main power, but it's still firing. The ship in question was running on backup power that should have lasted only minutes. Somehow, human engineers had managed to extend its combat capability by rerouting systems in ways that no other species would attempt during battle. They're using life support power to run their weapons, Kethvar realized. They're slowly suffocating themselves to keep fighting. The battle raged for 3 more hours. Human casualties mounted steadily, but their attacks never weakened. If anything, they seemed to become more determined as their losses increased. When officers were killed, junior crew members took command and continued the mission. When ships were crippled, their crews found ways to keep them useful. Most disturbing of all, human commanders refused evacuation even when their ships were clearly doomed. They stayed at their posts, coordinating attacks and protecting their crew members until the very end. Human vessel Steadfast is losing atmosphere, Lieutenant Zara reported. Captain Morrison is refusing extraction. Tell my crew to get out, came Captain Morrison's voice over the channel. I'll keep the ship steady until everyone's clear. Kethvar watched as the human captain remained at his post while his crew evacuated. Only when the last crew member was safely away did Morrison finally abandon ship. Even then, he triggered the ship's self-destruct system to prevent enemy salvage. As the battle continued, the hegemony forces began showing signs of confusion and fear. They were facing an enemy that fought in completely unpredictable ways. When hegemony commanders calculated that human forces should retreat, the humans attacked harder. When logic said the humans should surrender, they found new ways to keep fighting. The enemy is pulling back, Commander Vel announced with amazement. Hegemony forces are withdrawing from the outer defense grid. On the tactical display, red markers were indeed moving away from their positions. For the first time in the battle, hegemony ships were retreating instead of maintaining their defensive formations. Why are they retreating? Kethvar asked. They still have numerical advantage. Look at the casualty reports, Lieutenant Zara replied. Human losses are 3 times higher than enemy losses. But the hegemony is still pulling back. Kethvar studied the data and began to understand. The humans were winning not because they were taking fewer casualties, but because they were willing to take more. The hegemony had calculated that fighting such an enemy would cost more than victory was worth. They were fighting an enemy that simply could not be defeated in any conventional sense. The humans would keep fighting until every last one of them was dead, and they would take as many enemies with them as possible. Human forces are advancing on the fortress world, Commander Vel reported. They're actually going to attempt a planetary assault. As Kethvar watched the blue markers moving toward the heavily defended world, he realized something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The humans were not just winning this battle, they were enjoying it. 3 days after the battle, Kethvar sat alone in his quarters, studying the recorded communications from human vessels. The victory had shocked everyone in the Galactic Council. Against impossible odds, the humans had not only survived but completely routed hegemony forces. What should have been a massacre had become a decisive victory. But Kethvar was not studying the tactical data or weapon effectiveness reports. He was listening to the voices of human crew members during the fighting, trying to understand what had made them so effective. What he heard disturbed him more than the battle itself. Charlie Squad, this is Alpha Leader, came a voice from the recordings. We've got wounded on Deck 7. Can you spare anyone? Copy that, Alpha Leader. Jenkins is already on his way. Tell him to be careful. Deck 7 is still taking fire. Jenkins doesn't care about fire, came a laugh over the communication channel. He cares about his people. Kethvar played the recording again, analyzing the tone and word choice. The humans did not refer to their crew members as soldiers or personnel. They called them people. More than that, they used possessive terms. His people, our guys, my squad. This was not standard military communication protocol. Galactic forces maintained professional distance between commanders and subordinates to preserve operational efficiency. Personal attachments led to poor tactical decisions and compromised mission objectives. The humans did the opposite. Listen to this, Kethvar said to his assistant, a young Simathan analyst named Jextar. He played another recorded conversation. Engineering to bridge. We've lost main power to weapons array 3. Can you fix it, Miller? Not with what I've got here. Captain, I need parts from weapons array 4. That section is sealed off. Too much radiation. I know. But Patterson is still in there, and I'm not leaving him. Miller, that's an order. Stay out of that section. With respect, Captain, Patterson is my friend. Orders can go to hell. The recording continued with sounds of the engineer forcing his way into the radiation-flooded section of the ship, retrieving his wounded friend, and somehow managing to repair the weapons array at the same time. This engineer disobeyed direct orders, Jextar observed. He should have been disciplined. According to the battle reports, he was promoted. Kethvar replied. The captain commended him for initiative and dedication to crew welfare. Kethvar pulled up more recordings, looking for patterns in human behavior. What he found was consistent across all human vessels. They fought harder when their friends were in danger, not less effectively. When crew members were wounded, others took personal risks to help them. When ships were isolated, nearby human vessels would break formation to provide assistance. It's like they're not following military doctrine at all, Jextar commented. They're acting on emotion instead of logic. No, Kethvar said slowly, beginning to understand. They are following doctrine. It's just not the doctrine we recognize. He pulled up files from Earth's history, studying reports from human conflicts before they joined the galactic community. The pattern was there from the beginning. Human military units that fought together for extended periods became more effective, not less. They developed bonds that made them willing to die for each other. Look at this, Kethvar said, showing Jextar data from human evolutionary history. They evolved as pack hunters on a world that tried to kill them every day. For millions of years, their survival depended on group cooperation against threats that could destroy them individually. The data was remarkable. Earth was a death world by galactic standards. with weather that could kill, predators that hunted in groups, and diseases that spread rapidly through populations. Humans had survived by forming tight social groups and defending each other against everything their world could throw at them. But they're civilized now, Jextar protested. Surely they've evolved past such primitive instincts. Have they? Kethvar asked, playing another recording. This is Corporal Martinez. My squad is pinned down in Section 12. We're taking heavy fire and I've got 3 wounded. Martinez, this is Captain Chen. Can you retreat to a safer position? Negative, Captain. Rodriguez is hit bad, and I can't move him without exposing my people to enemy fire. How long can you hold? As long as it takes, Captain. We don't leave our own behind. That's not a retreat order, Martinez. That's a promise. Hold position. Help is coming. The recording continued, with sounds of a desperate firefight, as other human forces fought their way through enemy positions to reach the trapped squad. Not one human suggested leaving the wounded behind. Not one voice recommended abandoning the position to save the majority. They have a saying, Kethvar told his assistant, pulling up human cultural data. Leave no one behind. It's not just military doctrine for them. It's a sacred promise. Jextar studied the files with growing alarm. This explains their casualty rates. They take unnecessary risks to protect individuals when tactical doctrine would suggest sacrificing a few to save many. Exactly, and it makes them more dangerous, not less. Kethvar showed his assistant combat effectiveness data from the recent battle. Human units that suffered casualties fought with increased intensity afterward. Crews that lost friends became more aggressive, more determined, more willing to take risks. When one of them falls, the others become stronger, Kethvar observed. Pain increases their effectiveness instead of reducing it. Fear makes them angry instead of cautious. That's impossible. Grief and anger compromise tactical thinking. Not for humans. Watch this. The recording showed the moment when the human destroyer Defiant was crippled by enemy fire. 17 crew members died in the initial attack. The response from other human ships was immediate and violent. They abandoned their assigned positions and converged on the enemy formation that had destroyed their companion vessel. Look at the communications during this sequence, Kethvar said. Defiant is down, came a grim voice over the channel. 17 good people are dead. Copy that. All ships, target the bastards that killed them. This is personal now. What followed was not coordinated military action. It was revenge. Human ships attacked with reckless fury, using tactics that should have gotten them all killed. Instead, they overwhelmed the enemy formation and destroyed every ship in it. They fought better because they were angry, Jextar said with disbelief. Emotional compromise actually improved their performance. It gets worse, Kethvar said, pulling up psychological analysis data. The humans don't just fight for their immediate crew members. They consider every human part of their pack. The evidence was in the communications logs. When human ships from different fleets worked together, they immediately began using the same protective language. Ships they had never worked with before became our people within hours. Complete strangers were defended as fiercely as longtime companions. Listen to this exchange, Kethvar said, playing a recording from when human reinforcements arrived during the battle. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Tenacious. We're here to help. Rodriguez, this is Captain Chen. Good to have you with us. Chen, I've got fresh supplies and medical teams. Where do you need us most? We've got wounded on the Steadfast. Can you help them out? On our way. Nobody fights alone. Within minutes, the newly arrived human crews were taking the same risks and making the same sacrifices for people they had never met as they would for their own ship's crew. It's like they instantly adopt any human they encounter, Jextar observed. They expand their pack bonds to include strangers. And it's not limited to humans, Kethvar added, showing Jextar files from human interactions with other species. During the battle, human medical ships retrieved wounded crew members from damaged Zentari and Rigelian vessels. They risked their lives to save aliens they barely knew. The data showed human rescue teams entering damaged alien ships under heavy fire. carrying wounded crew members to safety, and providing medical treatment to species they had only recently met. They treated alien allies as if they were human crew members. "They're adopting the entire galaxy," Jextar said with growing horror. "They consider every friendly species part of their pack." "Now you're beginning to understand why 3 separate invasion forces failed against Earth," Kethvar replied. "The humans didn't just fight for their planet, they fought for their family. All 6 billion of them." Kethvar pulled up the final piece of data he had been studying: intercepted communications from hegemony forces during their retreat. "Human tactics are unpredictable," came a hegemony commander's voice. "They ignore logical battlefield doctrine. Request permission to withdraw. These creatures fight like cornered animals." "Negative. Continue the assault." "Sir, they're not stopping. We've inflicted heavy casualties, but they keep attacking. They seem to get more dangerous when they're hurt." "What are your recommendations, Commander?" "Avoid contact with human forces at all costs. They fight wars like extinction events. There's no reasoning with them. No negotiating surrender. They'll kill every one of us if we give them the chance." The recordings ended with the hegemony retreat order. An entire fleet had withdrawn, rather than continue fighting an enemy that refused to be defeated in any conventional sense. The hegemony forces were not just beaten, Kethvar told his assistant. They were terrified. They realized they were fighting a species that would never stop, never surrender, and never abandon their own. Jextar studied the data with the expression of someone who had discovered something horrible. "What does this mean for the rest of us?" 1. Kethvar considered the question carefully. The humans were allies now, but they were also the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered, not because of their technology or their military strength, but because of their psychology. "It means," Kethvar said slowly, "that we need to make sure we never become their enemy, because if we do, they won't just fight us. They'll hunt us down across every star system until we're extinct." Looking at the human vessels still docked at the station, Kethvar realized something that chilled him to his core. These beings had evolved from persistence hunters who never gave up the chase. They had turned their entire civilization into a weapon, and they had made the entire galaxy their hunting ground. The humans called themselves protectors and defenders, but to their enemies, they were something much more terrifying. They were the apex predators of space. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of the battle's end. Representatives from every member species packed the Great Chamber, their voices rising in heated debate about the human victory. Some called it impossible. Others demanded explanations. All of them wanted to understand how a small human fleet had destroyed the largest hegemony battle group in recent history. Kethvar stood at the central podium, his final report ready for presentation. In his hands was the most important military document he had ever written, and possibly the most terrifying. The conclusions he had reached would change how every species in the galaxy viewed humanity forever. "Honored representatives," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I have completed my analysis of human military capabilities. What I discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about warfare, about rational behavior, and about the nature of sapient species." The chamber fell silent. Even the most argumentative representatives stopped their debates to listen. Kethvar had served the council for 2 centuries, and his reputation for careful analysis was unquestioned. "The humans did not win their battle through superior technology," he continued. "Their ships are adequate but not exceptional. They did not win through brilliant strategy. Their tactics violated basic military principles. They did not win through numerical advantage. They were outnumbered 3-1. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber. If not technology, strategy, or numbers, then how had the humans achieved such a decisive victory? "They won," Kethvar said, "because they have turned their entire species into a weapon. Not their military, not their government, not their technology. Their psychology, their evolution, their fundamental nature as beings." He activated the holographic display, showing images from the battle. Human ships ramming enemy vessels, crews fighting in impossible situations, medical teams entering combat zones to retrieve wounded allies. The humans evolved on a death world as persistence hunters, he explained. For millions of years, their survival depended on one simple strategy. Never give up the chase. Never abandon the pack. Never stop hunting until the prey is down. A representative from the Altarian Defense Force stood up. Ambassador Kethvar, surely you're not suggesting that modern humans are still driven by such primitive instincts? I'm not suggesting it, Kethvar replied firmly. I'm stating it as fact. The humans have not evolved past their hunting origins. They have weaponized them. The display showed communication logs from human vessels during the battle. Voices calling fallen crew members family. Orders to never abandon wounded comrades. Promises to hunt down anyone who threatened human civilians. Listen to how they talk, Kethvar said as the recordings played. They don't refer to military objectives or strategic goals. They talk about protecting their pack, defending their territory, hunting their enemies. They use the language of predators, not soldiers. A Zentari admiral interrupted. Even if this is true, how does it explain their effectiveness? Emotional bonds should compromise military efficiency, not improve it. That assumption, Kethvar said, is based on how other species evolved. We developed past our primitive origins because cooperation was more effective than competition. We learned that logic and calculation produced better results than instinct and emotion. He changed the display to show evolutionary data from Earth compared to other worlds. Humans evolved differently. On their world, logic and calculation meant death. Only the groups that bonded strongly enough to sacrifice everything for each other survived. Only the hunters who refused to give up the chase caught their prey. Only the tribes that fought like every battle was their last one lived to reproduce. The implications began sinking in around the chamber. Species after species had evolved toward rational, calculated behavior because it was more effective for survival. Humans had evolved toward emotional, instinctive behavior for the same reason. What you're describing, said a Rigelian commander slowly, is a species that fights every conflict, as if their extinction depends on it. Exactly, Kethvar confirmed. To humans, every battle is an extinction event. Every threat to their pack is a threat to their species. Every enemy must be hunted down and destroyed completely, or it will return to threaten the pack again. The chamber erupted in alarmed conversations. Representatives whispered urgently to their advisors, calculating the implications of having such a species as members of the Galactic Council. You're saying they're dangerous, accused a Simithan delegate. I'm saying they're the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever encountered, Kethvar replied without hesitation. But not in the way you think. He changed the display again, showing footage of human medical teams rescuing wounded aliens during the battle. Human crews sharing resources with damaged Allied ships. Human commanders refusing evacuation until every friendly vessel was safely away. The humans have made the entire galaxy part of their pack, he explained. Every Allied species is now under their protection. Every civilian population is now part of their territory. Every threat to galactic peace is now a threat to their extended family. A council speaker stood up, her voice filled with concern. What does this mean for interstellar relations? Kethvar took a deep breath before delivering the most important words of his presentation. It means that under no circumstances should humanity ever be threatened as a species. They have turned their entire civilization into a weapon, and they consider every sapient being in the galaxy part of their pack. To threaten one human is to declare war on their entire species, and they will win. Shocked silence filled the chamber. This was not a prediction or a possibility. This was the assessment of the galaxy's most experienced military analyst after directly observing human capabilities. How can you be certain? Asked the Altarian representative. Because I watched them fight, Kethvar replied. I watched them sacrifice themselves for strangers. I watched them refuse to abandon wounded enemies. I watched them take personal responsibility for protecting every friendly ship in the battle zone. The display showed the final moments of the battle, when human forces had achieved victory, but continued fighting to rescue survivors from both sides. Human medical ships had entered the most dangerous areas of the battlefield to retrieve wounded hegemony crew members. Even their enemies become part of their pack once the fighting stops, Kethvar observed. They were carrying wounded hegemony officers to human medical facilities before the last enemy ship had even surrendered. That's impossible, protested a Zentari admiral. No species shows compassion to defeated enemies. Humans do, Kethvar said simply. Because to them, there are only two types of beings in the universe: pack members to be protected and threats to be eliminated. Once the hegemony stopped being a threat, they automatically became pack members deserving of protection. One of the 2020-26 IMT says the implications were staggering. A species that fought with unlimited ferocity against enemies but showed unlimited compassion to anyone who was not actively trying to kill them. What are your recommendations? Asked the council speaker. Kethvar looked around the chamber at the representatives of dozens of worlds, each trying to process what they had learned about their newest allies. First, never give humans reason to consider any council member species a threat. They don't understand limited warfare or political conflicts. To them, any aggression against their pack is an existential threat, requiring total response. Second, recognize that humanity's protection now extends to every member of this council. Any species that attacks a council member will face human retaliation, whether we ask for it or not. They have made themselves the galaxy's immune system. Third, understand that humans will never surrender, never retreat from a just cause, and never abandon anyone they consider part of their pack. This makes them the most reliable allies possible, but also the most dangerous enemies imaginable. The final recommendation was the most important. Finally, be grateful that they consider us all family now, because if they didn't, none of our civilizations would survive contact with them. As Kethvar stepped down from the podium, the chamber remained silent. Every representative was processing the same terrifying realization. They had welcomed into their alliance a species that viewed the entire galaxy as their hunting ground, and every friendly civilization as their responsibility to protect. The hegemony had learned this lesson the hard way. Their entire battle fleet had been destroyed not by superior firepower, but by encountering an enemy that simply could not be defeated. An enemy that treated every engagement as a fight for species survival and responded to casualties by fighting harder instead of seeking terms. There is one more thing, Kethvar said, returning to the podium. The humans asked me to deliver a message to this council. He pulled out a simple datapad containing a brief text message from Captain Chen. Thank you for welcoming us to the galactic community. We promise to protect everyone here as we would protect our own. No one fights alone anymore. The message was signed by every human in the fleet, from captains to engineering crew to medical personnel. It was not a diplomatic communication or a formal treaty. It was a promise from one pack member to another. Looking around the chamber at the awed and terrified faces of galactic representatives, Kethvar realized that the balance of power in the galaxy had fundamentally shifted, not because humans were the strongest species, but because they were the only species that would fight to extinction for complete strangers. The stars would fear them not because of their weapons or their technology, but because they had made the entire galaxy their family, and humans protected their family with a ferocity that defied every law of rational behavior. As the council session ended and representatives filed out to contact their homeworlds with the news, Kethvar remained at the podium, watching human ships through the chamber's viewing ports. They moved in formation around the station, not as conquerors or occupiers, but as protectors keeping watch over their extended pack. For the first time in galactic history, every sapient species in the known universe was under the protection of apex predators who considered them family. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. The humans had kept their promise. No one would fight alone anymore.